Hi, I'm Janus Adams, and welcome to Mondays Live with Elle Cole and Janus Adams. And happy Monday. Elle, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Elle, and I'm from the blog cleverlychanging.com. I'm a mom to twins, and I have a blog that discusses finance, health, and wellness, as well as homeschooling and parenting. I have a homeschool podcast, the Cleverly Changing Podcast, and I hope that you will check me out on my blog as well as listen to the podcast. And I've really been enjoying these conversations that we've had, and I thank you all for tuning in.
Yes, me too. And I'm Janus Adams. I'm an author historian and I am a journalist as well. I host the Janus Adams Show on public radio as well. And that's also a podcast, as well as I've written several books for adults as well as for children. And I too am a mother of twins. That's one of our fun intersections here. And from my experience raising my twins and realizing some of their needs, I created a children's series, backpackskids.com. You can find us there. And so that's what I do. And you can visit me on my website, janusadams.com, and you can click right on there and that will bring you directly to Backpacks or about my shows or anything else. My specialty has been for years history. And as a scholar of women's history, as a scholar of African American history, and particularly this week, I know Elle and I wanted to discuss two historic giants, moral giants, leaders. C.T. Vivian, Reverend C.T. Vivian, who died 2 days ago, and well, forgive me, it's not 2 days ago, but early, we are pre-taping this, so a couple of days ago, and John Lewis, who died 2 days ago. Both giants of the civil rights movement. And, you know, one of the things that I am always concerned about when we say the civil rights movement is that in my work, I've become very clear that it was the penultimate human rights movement, because it was not just when you violate someone's civil rights the way African Americans were violated. That is a human rights violation and should be seen as such. But what were your thoughts when you heard about the deaths of these two men?
Well, I think for the most part, my heart was crushed because the time that we're living in, I feel like they didn't get to see it in better. And to me, for men to have fought so long and hard for better human rights for all of us, for them to die in a period of just turbulence in our society, it was a bit crushing, because I think, you know, to pass on and feel like your work has really made a difference, you know, would just have felt better. And maybe they did feel like their work had really made a difference. And I believe that it has, but each week we've been talking about how far we've come, but how much further, you know, we really should be, and we aren't there yet. We're really repeating the same. And so, you know, my heart was crushed because I feel like they deserve to live and see better. And the fact of our politics and our voting rights to be, you know, at stake right now in 2020, to me, it's like, when I thought of Representative John Lewis, his skull was fractured for protesting for the right to vote. And here, that was in the 60s. And here we are many, many decades later, and people are seeing their voting rights being rolled back in certain states. And so personally, I was crushed by that. And I hope that they were very positive men. So, you know, they always were able to see the bigger picture. And so I think they always looked for the good that was to come. So that's
Yeah.
really how I pictured it and view it.
In fact, when I've been asked, well, it looks as though things just haven't changed any. And especially as you've just said that, John Lewis is one of his main statements was, if you think nothing has changed, walk a mile in my shoes. And it's one of the reasons that I don't like to say nothing has changed, because too many people gave too much. Even if it's drips and drabs, too many people gave too much to get to where we are for us to say that nothing has happened. And it's not because of the country that I don't say it, it's because I don't want to dishonor the people who gave their lives for this. Indeed, I think sometimes we need to be a little bit more aware when we talk about who's a patriot and who isn't. I think Black people have been infinitely patriotic because they put their lives on the line. These people that we're talking about put their lives on the line to improve this country. So yes, things have gotten better, and both men did see considerable change in their lifetimes that they themselves deserved credit for. They never took credit, just as themselves, but they certainly deserved the credit for that. Indeed, Shuttlesworth it was the way C.T. Vivian was beaten down for speaking to Bull Connor, the Bull Connors, and in particular Sheriff Jim Clark. There was one notable incident where C.T. Vivian was speaking to them, and he analogized the actions of the sheriffs and their deputies to what Hitler had done in the Third Reich. And he was accurate in that. In fact, what many people don't realize is that Hitler very clearly said he took his inspiration for the final solution from what America had done in terms of its treatment of indigenous people and of Blacks. We don't want to see that, but we need to see that. And that was where Hitler said he took his inspiration. So here are these people who lived through that, and who were the victims of that, who spoke to it. And C.T. Vivian was beaten to a pulp. That was the reason why then the march across the Pettus Bridge was called in answer to what had happened with C.T. Vivian and the people at that earlier demonstration. And that response was then met by this huge, you don't even think they have that many deputies and sheriffs in an area. And indeed, they must have called them from all around the area, not just from Selma, to come and be this presence to beat back Black people from saying, no, we will not be abused at every turn. And that is that march across the Pettus Bridge that John Lewis led with Hosea Williams was the one that John Lewis's skull was cracked with. That's how sick these people are. That's how vicious and vile American law enforcement has been toward Black people. And but he came through it. I don't want to say he rose above it, because that's really not something to rise above, but he did come through it. What he rose above were things like growing up so impoverished. And then with his just fierce determination to educate himself in a place that would happily collect taxes from his parents, but did not want them. That's the taxation without representation that we should be talking about. And it was a life and death struggle for us, not about some taxes and tea in a harbor. Not that people did not have a right to protest that, but when we are protesting life and death and are not supposed to do so, you have to call those things into perspective and into question. And it was protesting that beating back and beating down that led to what is now known as Bloody Sunday. But John Lewis rose above the people who would take his parents' taxes, not allow him to have a decent school, not allow him to borrow a book from a library saying you're whatever they wanted to call them at the time. You can't even borrow a book from a library. And the strength of this man's character, I think that's what we need to talk about when we talk about people in the movement, is not this depravity that some whites were so willing to demonstrate, but the strength of character of the people who participated in the movement. And that is what rallied people the world over to our defense. It really is.
And for me, that's what I love about being able to witness them in my lifetime and see them and see their work, because they were such dedicated people. And it's like, for me as a young person, you've gone through so many hard times and have been literally abused. John Lewis had been jailed over 45 times, and I could say it's easy to get discouraged if you're working so hard and you're being abused, but he didn't get discouraged. He continued to pursue justice and continued to educate others, continued to work in Congress, and he never lost hope. And so for me, it's saying, although we may not make the strides that you imagine and envision in your mind, you still have to fight on. You cannot lose hope. You still must continue. And I think they really just showed the best example that they could show about how to keep going, even if things aren't the way they're supposed to be. So that's really one of the takeaways that I take from their life. Don't lose hope. Don't get discouraged. Don't allow the depravity and the things that you see to cause you to give up, because giving up is never an option.
It's never an option, because that's what they want you to do. That's what they are pushing you to do, to say, I give up. And then what do you end up getting for that, having given up? You get Jim Crow. Not that people gave up, and that's why we have Jim Crow. No, we had Jim Crow because people were depraved. That's why we had Jim Crow. We didn't have all these horrific laws because people gave up. We have had these horrific laws because of the brutishness and the sickness of this culture that could only thrive in its mind. It talks about greatness, but why does greatness require brutality? Why does greatness require who you can exploit? Why does greatness require who you can kill on a street? That's not greatness. So that is, some people who attempted to give up. You are fighting for yourself. That's what you're fighting for. You are fighting for your self-regard and self-respect. And that is why we cannot give up. It, as you say, it is not an option, because it is not an option whether or not I should feel safe as I walk down the street. It is not an option whether or not my two grandsons, who are both, the baby of the two is 6'7", the elder of the two is 6'2". It is not an option whether or not my family should have to worry every day which crazy policeman is going to decide that they are really great targets for today's hunting practice. No, that's not an option. So I was interviewed the other day, and the person said, well, don't you see progress? And she was wanting me so badly to see progress and to say, but things are a little better, and yes, it's okay because things are a little better. And I'm really tired of that. What I see is that you're either pregnant or you're not. You're either just or you're not. You are either decent or you're not. You are either a society that upholds its laws, not its fundamental ideals, because its fundamental ideals were quite problematic, as we know. The founding ideas were founded on genocide and enslavement. So we're not going to uphold the founding principles, no. But the fundamental ideas as expressed in the Declaration of Independence, those are the founding ideals, and that we do need to uphold. Either you're going to uphold those or you're not. Either you're going to tell the truth or you're lying. And I think this society has had a little bit enough of lying over these past couple of years that we need to really see ourselves for what we are and what we have become once again, and then take action, not for change, but to stop it. Just stop it. That's my take on it.
Right. Well, I know that you were able to attend the March on Washington. Can you share what that was like to be there in person?
It was, that I attended because it was one of the most unbelievable experiences of my lifetime. My father had already died, so my mother took me. And she and I went together with a cousin and her sister and my cousin. And we got on a bus in Harlem. We were living in the Bronx. We drove down around 2:00 in the morning to be on a bus in Harlem at 3 to head to the march. We were told that this was, once we got on that, the prepping and priming of everybody, I mean, everybody was excited and thrilled to be there, but they made sure we were focused. And the focus was on the idea that this was a journey from which there was no turning back. This what we refer to the March on Washington. It was the March on Washington for jobs and freedom. And I always, in my head, I would say, well, why freedom? Why freedom? And it's only in the last few years that I've come to understand that freedom wasn't a metaphor. It was the freedom that had not happened after the Civil War supposedly granted freedom to all Black people. That was why so we were going for the unfinished business of something begun in 1619, but then a turning point that was supposed to have happened in 1865 at the end of the Civil War that did not fully happen and was never fully realized, hence why we were there for freedom. And on that day, we then took the bus down. We did not have any problems from New York into New Jersey, Pennsylvania, but when we got to the Maryland-Delaware border, you know, that proverbial Mason-Dixon line. The driver pulled into a bus stop. And when we got there, our bus was completely surrounded with a white mob. There were sheriffs there, sheriffs and police, let's say law enforcement, who stood back and let this mob have a good old time rocking that bus from side to side, back to front. I have frequently said that what they intended was no lullaby, but that bus was rocked by this mob, determined in their way that we would not go to Washington. But we did. Our bus carried on. And when we got to Washington, D.C., when the driver got us out of that mess and we got to Washington, D.C., it was, you had come through the fire, come through the storm to get there. We were greeted by the people who had arrived before. They too surrounded us, but in an entirely different way to welcome us. We in turn welcomed the bus after that. That's what it was about. And the movement was defined for me that day. I remember I was a kid. And my aunt had made this pink and white gingham dress for me. And I was a teenager, but I had my hair, because it was hot, August 28th, I had my hair in these long, thick braids and this pink and white gingham dress with a scarf. And one of the other things you'll notice when you look at the pictures of all these demonstrators, people are always dressed. You notice John Lewis is beaten down. They are dressed in suit and tie. The women are dressed in their Sunday best. They may have on flats, but they're dressed. And we were dressed too. But after that March on Washington Day, I never wore my hair in those braids again, and I never wore that pink and white gingham dress again. It was my coming of age. And the positive part about it was the privilege of being there with all the speakers, being there in the thick of all the demonstrators. There had never been a march of that size before. The Congress actually closed that day because they were so terrified. What they were terrified was their guilt for perpetuating and keeping this. That too is the miracle of Black people, that we have not done unto others as they have done unto us culturally. And that's what that nonviolent movement was about. So it was an epiphany of our strength, that we had gotten there, that we had done this, that we had been able to pull it off, that we had surprised everybody. And it was just the most powerful experience. So by the time, yes, John Lewis spoke, and he was extraordinary because he was the kid on the stage. He was the youngest. He was in his 20s, but he was still the youngest. And Dr. King was no elder either. You have to remember that these people were young. Dr. King, Malcolm X, they were killed, they were 39. So all this that had happened in Dr. King's public lifetime began when he was 26 and a recent college graduate. So I just still remember the sound of the crowd and the pride people took and the way we looked out for each other. And that to me was what the movement was about. If you couldn't march, you could serve those who did. If you were not in the position where you were strong enough to know that those blows were coming, then you were there to bandage and care for those who did. Whatever you could do, the march had a place for you, the movement had a place for you. That too was empowering. And it is no wonder, therefore, that J. Edgar Hoover, head of the FBI, a demon, if ever there was, who allowed these horrific acts to happen against Black people. He called Nobel Peace Prize laureate Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. the most dangerous man in America. And indeed, we were dangerous, because it was dangerous to just believe in yourself, dangerous to believe in each other, dangerous to keep each other going, and dangerous to say, ain't gonna let nobody turn us around. And that's what we were that day.
That's powerful. I think in my lifetime, I can only think of those life-changing moments. Like for me, the Million Man March is something that has stayed in my mind. And I remember the words. I remember the kids because I was a kid, and I remember the kids who went up there and spoke. And I remember the feeling inside that I felt so much hope, so much promise. And, I guess for my kids in their lifetime, in some ways, it would be the Women's March. So I think that every few decades, there is a monumental moment that will be life-changing, that calls you to look within yourself and see whether or not you're going to be committed to fighting for human rights for all people. And I think for us, it has called us to be committed to it and dedicated to educating other people. And I think, it's always more to do. But I think everybody has a role, and everybody has something that they can do. Yes. And so I thank you for educating us in this conversation, because it's living history. And on my blog, when I wrote about Representative John Lewis, I spoke about meeting him in person. And the first time I realized that the civil rights movement wasn't so long ago. My sister had been an intern at the King Center in Atlanta, Georgia. Oh. And when she returned, she came back with a brochure about freedom riders. And even as a child, I loved historical knowledge, and I was drawn to history. So I was just so excited that she gave me this brochure. And I remember opening it up, and I remember seeing the birth year of many people and the year that they died. And I remember there were several freedom riders that were still alive. And I was like, some of these people are still alive. And John Lewis was one of the freedom riders that was still alive. And so many decades later, having the opportunity to meet him in person was just a surreal moment for me and a life-changing experience. And, we have to pass these moments and pass these experiences on to the next generation, because we can't have them think this is something that happened in a book so long ago, because it wasn't that long ago. And so I think that, just having this conversation with you has encouraged me to have more conversations with my children about America, about civil rights, about human rights, and about the work that they must carry on themselves. So thank you.
Thank you. And didn't you posted a beautiful picture of yourself with John Lewis? Where was that?
So I believe it was last year. It was either last year or 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. I attended a Black Caucus event. I'm in the DC area, and they often have parties and after parties after different gatherings. And I attended an after party.
And where should people go to see that picture?
Oh, so you can go to my Instagram. It's Cleverly Changing on Instagram, and it's one of the pictures. And he was like really the same height as me, but I had always seen him as a giant of a man.
He is.
To stand there next to him. Although in physical stature, he wasn't a giant, but his voice made him 10 feet tall because it just moved you. And that night, to speak to him, to, hold his hand and, to see his smile, it changed me. It made me see that, I may just be one person, but even I have something to do, something that I can do to further his legacy. And so I'm sorry that he has passed on, but I do appreciate the experience and the opportunity to meet him, because it definitely was a life-changing moment for me.
Yes, absolutely. So, well, thank you so much for joining us today on Mondays Live with Elle and Janus. We look forward to being with you again next week. This is really a joy for me because it's very rare that you get to share what you think is important. You get the validation that it's important, but you get to share the stories of all of our lifetimes. And I think it is so empowering for us. John Lewis was a poor boy from Alabama who became he is known as the conscience of the Congress. But he had a family, and everybody in that family, yes, Black Lives Matter, because everybody in that family had a role, had something to do to encourage each other. So here is from Elle's family and from my family to your family, Black Lives Matters, all Black Lives Matter, your life matters. We celebrate you, and we thank you so much for being with us on these Mondays, because it is a privilege for you to welcome us into your space. So thank you. See you next Monday.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. There we go. I have been.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so I'll see you next week. And you have a good day. And thank you so much, because I have decided to do a curriculum. I realized how siloed my brain is. And when you were talking about my doing a Black History curriculum, and I was thinking about backpacks, one of the things is that with backpacks, we only have 2 titles that are, quote, Black titles. But I kind of have over 1,200 essays in 3 other books that deal with, and it occurred to me that maybe what I should be doing is an anti-racist curriculum for parents that will bring in all of this, and just deal with how we look at it from an anti-racist point of view, based on both backpacks and the books that I've done for adults. So that's what I'm working on now, so that can be what we start promoting in August. So yay, team. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I will edit this and I will put it on your page as well as my pages on tomorrow. And I think the conversation